think I feel nauseous. My heart is beating like a bongo drum. I wish we could just cancel the whole thing and all go back to bed. 13 and a half is too young to leave home.
What's your name, boy?
John Milton.
John Milton, sir! Get him.
Pylon! Let's stop, you guys!
I will be teaching you malodorous meerkats how to be men. You will learn about women and sex.
Please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome Mr. John Cleese.
Thank you. I like these mics. They're much better than the ones I wear in the theatre, where you have this funny thing around your ears and then you have it in the back pocket, and every time you sit back against a seat there's a loud bang. I like these old-fashioned mics.
Absolutely. 70s era technology leads the way. Now, I think you have the distinction of being the first person I've ever interviewed who's had a lemur, a mountain, and a comet named after them.
Yes, I have a species of lemur named after me. A little lemur called Avahi cleesii, which is the Latin name, and it's known as Cleese's woolly lemur. And I've never seen one because there aren't many of them, and they're down by a lake in Madagascar, but I thought that was a real distinction.
Now, I think the first question we'd all like to know is, how on earth does somebody like John Cleese get involved with a South African bestseller being turned into a film?
Well, I'm very happy to be able to tell you about this because I tell you, I've tried to get one or two accents here, and but this one is one of the strangest ones I've ever heard, you know. It was simply that it was a good script. You see, when we were chatting just now, Oscar and I, he was asking me how many scripts I get, and the answer is not many. And the funny thing is that I used to get quite a regular supply of parts in America, maybe 2 or 3 movies a year, and now that dried up about 5 years ago. My agent said it's not to do with your age. He said it's to do with the fact they're not writing those kind of cameos anymore. So recently the movies I've made have been, well, this lovely little movie Spud, which when I saw it, and I saw it over a year ago at the premiere, I was really touched by it. I didn't know how good it was going to be, and I was really happy that I thought it was so good, because I enjoyed working with that crowd. They were a very, very nice crowd, and I liked John Van Der Ruit, who wrote the 4 books. I thought he'd done a very good job working, you know, on the script, and I thoroughly enjoyed the experience. And did it work well today? Good. Because it's quite touching, isn't it? I mean, it's funny, but it also, I had a tear in my eye a couple of times at the premiere. That doesn't usually happen with my movies.
Unless, of course, from the occasional box office. Getting back to the meat of the part, this is a meaty part. Mr. Edley, the Gov, he has a trajectory that's both forlorn and hopeful. I'm wondering whether you used any of your own schooling as part of his integration, or was it directly based on?
Yeah, no, that's quite right, because actually what I don't, people don't really know, and why would they, is that when I got into Cambridge in 1958, I got a place at Cambridge. It was a time when the government had just abolished national service or conscription. So there was a bottleneck at the universities. There were people who just left school who wanted to go straight to university, and people who'd left school 2 years before and had been in the armed forces for 2 years. So I was told I had to wait for 2 years and then they would give me a place. So I went off and I actually taught at my old prep school. And I remember, because when the headmaster, who I'd always rather liked when I was a boy there, his name was Geoffrey Tolson, and he heard that I didn't have anything to do, and it was his idea. He rang me up and said, why don't you come and have a chat? And I will tell you one quick story, which is that when I got there, he said, well, how would you like to come and teach here? And of course, I was only 18 and a half, so I was only 5 years older than the sort of head boy. And I said, well, I think I could manage it. But I said, what do you want me to teach? And he said, I want you to teach English, history, and geography. And I said, Mr. Tolson, I don't know anything about any of them. I said, I've just done science 31 out of 36 periods a week for 3 years. I got my A-levels in maths, physics, and chemistry. I don't know anything. And he said to me, he said, John, don't worry. They're 10 years old. Just stay a page ahead. So I had the experience of standing in a classroom for 2 years, and the whole thing felt very, very familiar. And I have to say, the casting of the guys, the boys in the film, was really wonderful, because those are just the guys. They're almost exactly like that off camera, and I got very fond of them.
Now, it's interesting to be a man who recently has been cast in cameos and in smaller roles that are, in a sense, echoes of your former glory, to have this meaty role, but also to be directed by younger directors, where it must be, I don't say challenging, but an interesting experience to have literally 40 to 50 years of comedy performing, and them going, well, you know, this is how you should do it.
Well, it's usually more cooperative like that. It's a little bit like the Bond movies, when I did those two, you know, first of all as R, and then after Desmond Llewellyn was killed in that awful car crash, you know, I became Q for one. Well, what happens is it goes backwards and forwards a bit. So that the first thing is you get the script, and then they say, are you interested in doing it? And in this case, I thought it was an excellent script. A lot of scripts get read by my agents, and many of them are so awful that you just wouldn't believe how terrible they are. In fact, my heart sinks more when people ask me to read a film script than anything else they could ask me to do. If they say, get out on this window ledge 27 stories up, I'd say, yeah, sure. But if they say, could you read my film script? Because it's not reading the film script that's the difficult. The difficult thing comes afterwards, which is, how do you tell somebody something useful when it is absolutely terrible? And most of them are. So this one got weeded out by my agent, and when I read it, I thought, this is a great part. A couple of things I've never done before, which is play a drunk scene. You know, never done that, and I wasn't sure how...
On camera.
Hmm?
On camera.
On camera, yeah. So, well, it's quite interesting when you do something like that, you know, and you kind of think, well, how do you do it without overplaying it? And I read what one or two people had said about playing drunk, which is that a lot of the time when people get drunk, they just speak more deliberately to cover it up, that kind of thing. But as I said, it was a very, very nice part. And the awful thing is, and I'll be quite honest with you, I'm not terribly interested in acting. It's a shocking thing to say. I found comedy interesting, and when I first wrote comedy, it was fascinating to learn some of the rules. And then when you've written something, trying to make it work for the first time, if you're on a set, for example, and you have a scene to play, the most interesting part of the day is the first 2 hours, because you walk onto the set with the other actors and you start saying, well, this is how are we going to make this work? Are you going to sit there? Are we going to stand there? Are we going to move? How are we going to move it around? How are we going to play the scene? That first rehearsal, the first hour of rehearsing it, that's the really interesting bit. Then you fall back on technique, because you basically do the same take over and over and over again from different angles so that they get their coverage. And that's just a question of discipline, you know, and technique. And I can do the same take pretty much 20 times in a row, and people will hardly see any difference between the takes at all. But the first bit, when you're discovering how to make it work, that's interesting. And it's a bit like that on stage. In the first part of your performance, for the first few days or even the first few weeks, you're figuring out, how do I make this work? And there's a certain point when you think, well, actually, tonight I did it about as well as I can do it. So tonight on, it's downhill. You see what I mean? And there are some people who love that. I mean, there are some people like Barry Humphries or Michael Crawford, who you see when they go out for the reception of the audience at the end, they love it. It's almost their lifeblood, it seems to me. But once I've gone out, I just want to bow once and say, well, I hope you enjoyed it, and go. It's not a deeply interesting process to me. Once I've figured it out, it becomes just a question of sort of professional discipline and a kind of honor to do it absolutely the best that you can. But it's not not exciting to repeat the same performance every night.
So the evoking of a laugh is your goal, but the adoration that comes with it isn't.
Absolutely. In fact, it's almost an embarrassment sometimes. In fact, last night, I will tell you something I told my girlfriend last night as there was cheering at the end, and I remember thinking, I wish I enjoyed it more, and I wish I'd actually invented a cure for cancer or solved a Palestine crisis or something, you know, because to get all this applause just for making people laugh seems at times almost disproportionate.
Still, though, you've done reasonably well over the years.
Well, yes, except for the alimony, that's taken the edge off it.
Well, I assume it's wonderful actually to see you so productive in these twilight years.
I tell you, I have to be. I've already paid her 17 million, and I have another 4 million to pay, so I can't sit at home. Or indeed sit in the street with a hat next to me and expect a coffee. But it's the thing is, the truth is, Oscar, that what I love is the writing. The writing, if I can start a day with a sheet of blank paper, and then at the end of the day, there's something on that paper that will amuse people, make them laugh, or even make them think, that always feels to me at the end of the day like an achievement. Whereas if I've been on a set acting all day, I don't have the same sense of accomplishment. For me, I've always thought of myself as a writer-performer. I write and then I tend to perform what I do.
Well, I'd love to hear about the writing partners that you've had, from Graham Chapman to Connie Booth to Charles Crichton, working on Monty Python, Fawlty Towers, and A Fish Called Wanda. These are three very different processes, three very different,
yeah.
I guess, fields of comedy. But can you tell us that blank piece of paper with a hungover Chapman smoking a pipe, looking at you going, entertain me. How did it actually happen from day one?
Well, it depends, because some days you go into the morning with an idea, but the majority of days you don't. And you just sit down and you make your first cup of coffee, and then, I mean, we sometimes used to open up a thesaurus rather than a dictionary, and I would just read words out. Plummet, cauliflower, disposition. I mean, I would just do that just to see what kicked us off. Other times things actually happened that made us think about it. For example, if the Dead Parrot sketch actually started off as a sketch about a car. Michael Palin had bought a car from a fellow, and when it started to go wrong, he would go back and see this man, whose name was Mr. Gibbons, and Mr. Gibbons would say, well, listen, Mr. Palin, anything wrong with the car, just bring it in. And Michael said, well, there is something wrong with it, and I have brought it in. He said, yeah, well, you know, anything wrong with it, bring it in. And he was this slippery kind of guy who would never actually put himself out to fix what was wrong with the car. And Graham Chapman and I wrote that, and it's actually on a DVD called How to Irritate People, which you referred to, I noticed.
Well, I brought the car in.
Oh, the car, lovely model, never any trouble with those. I don't know why they stopped making them.
Well, I have had some trouble with it.
No, never any trouble. If you have any trouble, I'll bring it in.
Look, I have had some trouble and I have brought it in. Will you have a look at it?
And when we got to do Python, hardly anyone had ever seen this program, How to Irritate People. I said to Graham, you know, there's something about this sketch I like, but the second-hand car, it's such a cliche. And then we talked for 5 minutes, and we said, well, supposing it was an animal? And we both laughed, and we said, well, that's a pet shop. And then we thought, is it a dog or a parrot? Those were the two possibilities. And we thought, well, people might be more sensitive about a dead dog, whereas who cares if a parrot is dead? It's probably, we're all better off if parrots are dead, you know. So that's how we got to that one. It was another time when we were shooting a scene in a lifeboat down on the south coast, and I had to go on to get into this boat, and it was a very rough day. And I came up, when I was given the cue, I came up some steps dressed as one of those Python women. You know those, oh yes, oh I love Jean-Paul Sartre, all that. And I got up there, and when the director said action, I went up the steps and went, oh yes, and threw up. And went down, they cleaned me up, put the makeup on again, I went down, I was feeling terrible. He said action, I came up the steps and said, oh yeah, I threw up again. By the end of it, I was feeling so terrible, I went and lay down, because you know what seasickness is like. I mean, I felt awful. And after about 6 hours, we finished shooting, and we were driving back to London, and Chapman was in the car with me, and he was a doctor. He said, "You should eat something. What do you feel like?" And I said, "I feel like a bit of cheese." And so we started watching the shops as we drove through to see if there was a shop there that would have anything to eat, and especially cheese. And we saw a chemist's shop. And I remember saying to Graham, "I wonder if they'd have any cheese." And Graham said, "Well, if they did, it would be medicinal cheese." And that made us laugh. And when we got down the next morning, we decided to write the sketch about somebody going into a chemist shop to buy medicinal cheese. But of course, you wouldn't go to a chemist shop to buy cheese unless you'd have been into a cheese shop and discovered that they didn't have any. So that's why we wrote the cheese shop sketch, but we never got to the second bit in the chemist. So it's the most, it's the whole point about creativity. I actually do exquisitely tedious seminars on the subject, is that it comes from the unconscious. You cannot control it. And that's the great problem with the producers these days. They want to try and control things. They don't understand that really the way to proceed is to find someone with talent and give them the space to create. They want to be involved in the creation, and of course they have no idea what they're doing, as I say in my stage show, and there's a very interesting research done by a psychologist, a social psychologist called David Dunning at Cornell, who says that in order to be able to know whether you're any good at something, you have to be good at that something to start with. And the corollary of that is, if you're absolutely no good at something, then you lack exactly the skills and knowledge that you need to know that you're absolutely no good at it. So the problem with the producers is not just that they have no idea what they're doing, but of course they have no idea that they have no idea what they're... And that is why there's so few good films made, that people don't know how to create a creative atmosphere.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say that I think Dickens is a boring old fart with no writing ability whatsoever. To be honest, sir, he's a snoring old colonialist, and I wouldn't even use Dickens to wipe my own bum.
Now you listen to me, you tiny rodent. What you have there is some of the finest literature of the Victorian era.
Well, obviously there wasn't much happening in the Victorian era then, was there, sir?
You better take care, boy, or I'll have you reading Enid Blyton in public.